to another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw. This is a huge week for us here at Calexit and here, of course, at the National Divorce Talk Raw show. National divorce is trending in the news. Everyone in America is talking about national divorce this week, especially after the raid at Trump's house. Now, while we don't like Trump and think he's a racist and the opposite of all California values, I have to say, the raid on Trump's house, whether it was done perfectly or whether it was done not, has exacerbated tension in America and increased the discussion and the want for a national divorce, which is nothing but good for the Calexit movement. No, we didn't want these things to happen. No, we don't like Trump. Yes, we think he's bad. But we've also given up on America. I think it's better for California to just leave, and at least we could protect ourselves. The concept of national divorce, as it becomes more popular, makes Calexit more likely through the concept of normative programming or normalizing the conversation. Well, national divorce is all over the news and everyone's talking about it, which means the chance of Calexit has just jumped dramatically. Plus, we're going to conduct an analysis of what's going on after the Trump raid and show you how it's definitely going to get worse and not better, and why the system is not capable of calming the situation down. Coming up in just a minute, but first, well, if you've been seeing the news or if you've watched National Divorce Talk Raw here at Yes California, we've been covering the fact that Donald Trump, the former American president's house, was raided by departments of the federal government over missing documents. At least that's what it appears. There's not a whole lot of information out yet, but that's what happens. In response, conservatives primarily, Trump supporters, have started talking about civil war and national divorce because they view the investigation into Trump and the raiding of his house as signs of the Democratic Party using the federal government to go after a political rival. That sort of behavior is ubiquitous and exists throughout Latin America. As we've documented here at Yes California, we've shown you how the behaviors of a traditional stable democracy in America are falling down and how America is more closely resembling a failed Latin American democracy. We started saying that in 2014 when Obama was around, pointing at post-constitutional orders like Obama deciding he could do immigration law, which is the exclusive control of the Congress, or like Congress deciding that they could do foreign relations by inviting the Prime Minister of Israel to Congress, when that's the exclusive domain of the presidency. So we were noticing how people are stepping outside of their lanes. The system isn't working. The financial system, the regulatory bodies that were supposed to prevent the 2008 global collapse all did not work too. And in 2014, we said the system's just breaking down. It's more like a failed Latin American democracy. Well, another word for failed Latin American democracy is banana republic. And this week, Republicans are calling America a banana republic because in their view, Donald Trump was targeted and the Democrats used the federal government to attack a political rival. Now, if you talk to liberals, they view it as this is a great day. This is a sign of a strong democracy because it means that no one is above the law, including presidents. Well, there's a problem there. I don't like Trump. We're not siding with the conservatives, but there's a lot of evidence to show that they're not 100% baseless in their argument that the justice system is a little bit biased. We'll show you that. Not saying I agree with their conclusion, but I am saying there's a little bit of evidence to give them some credence, and that's only going to encourage them to believe more that national divorce is here. Additionally, you have people like Andrew Yang, who's not a Trump supporter, saying the optics of this are bad. And additionally, we're going to show you the Democratic Party and the Justice Department itself have done a really poor job of explaining what this is about and why they're doing it. And we'll show you that right now. When you add it all together, it's not a good look, and it looks like things are going to get worse. And it looks like the Democrats as a party and the federal government now underneath the Democratic Party control simply are not equipped. They're just not mentally or philosophically equipped to handle this particular debate at this time, which means the debate is only going to get worse. And aggressive conversations about national divorce will only increase. Also, we'll point out how the argument that Functional democracies can remove their leaders. If you look at France, Israel, and South Korea, so there's no big deal that we're doing it here, kind of doesn't apply to America at all. So let's get right into it. We're going to do a lot of share screens. We'll walk you through all the material. Again, we are not fans of Trump. We don't like Trump. He's against California values. We're just trying to talk about how close we are to actually having secession occur in California. So here's the first thing. Bloomberg had to write an article saying the FBI raid of Trump's Mar-a-Lago home doesn't mean civil war. So Bloomberg automatically had to take a stance that this does not mean civil war. You can have presidents be arrested and look into, and it doesn't mean civil war automatically. They weren't the only ones. Secession is not an option. This is Daily Kos. It's a liberal magazine. And right as conservatives were talking about secession, here's a liberal magazine saying, that's ridiculous. You can't secede. It's not an option either. Secession is not even worth discussing as a hypothetical exercise, never mind seriously debating. So there's another one. Now, in return, what we have is conservatives are sounding the alarm about national divorce. So here's Dallas Observer. Texas GOP is losing it over the FBI raid of Trump's Mar-a-Lago residence. Now, the Texas GOP had already planned to have a question on Texas secession before the raid at Trump's house. So you already have a secession-based party, and they're going over the deep end with Trump being searched. Sadly, such an assault could only take place in a broken third world countries. The statement read, sadly, America has now become one of those countries, corrupt at a level never seen before. Banana Republic, basically, is what the Texas GOP is saying. Let's take a look at Fox News. Hopefully that plays.
Ventura Volkswagen proudly
Give it a second.
Volkswagen ID4 electric vehicle. Build and reserve your. Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. I'm Will Kane in for Tucker. A day after the FBI's raid on former President Donald Trump, we're starting to see what a permanent national split looks like. A divorce. Nobody wants to say it out loud, but it's true. And this is not simply a break between Democrats and Republicans. No, that's too simple. What we're seeing is a divide between people who are willing to use the power of the state to silence their opponents and those who are unwilling. What's held this country together since the Civil War? It's not the federal code. It's not even the Bill of Rights, as important as that document is. Remember, the Soviet Union had a Bill of Rights. It guaranteed freedom of speech and equal rights. But in practice, the Bolsheviks assassinated their political opponents and sent their dissidents to the gulags. As Beria boasted, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Now, what's kept us functioning through the centuries where the Bolsheviks failed is that our Constitution separated powers and prevented a uniparty. We've also had an unwritten understanding that state power will not be used, shall not be used for improper political purposes. The law must be enforced equally without political considerations. And once you lose that common understanding,
so that's how Republicans view it. And they're talking about a permanent split in America, basically a national divorce. Now, not to be undone, Andrew Yang, who's a liberal and does not like Donald Trump, has also said that the optics of this are bad. Maybe Trump did something wrong. Maybe Trump does need to go to prison. Maybe he needs to go to prison for life. But this really feels like a political attack. And it's really hard to explain that it is not one. And it's going to exacerbate tensions in America. So that's Andrew Yang saying that. And if you're unsure that that's true, well, let's take a look at this. Turns out Nancy Pelosi was literally asked if she's concerned for her safety, given that there's talk about a civil war after the Trump raid.
The coward dies 1,000 deaths. And how we can engage in the region in that matter also.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Do you think that Department of Justice or the FBI should come forward and offer some kind of either explanation or at least context for the raid in Mar-a-Lago or something they may not typically do, but given the
I think we made it really clear that this meeting was about this, Cordell. I'll be having another press conference the next day or so about legislation and about whatever else is going on, with all due respect to your question. On this subject,
I know security was important on this trip, but in terms of security here at home, since this action was taken against.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you.
I said, I know security was important on your trip,
Yeah.
but just in terms of security here at home, just in light of the action at the former president's home, is there any concern right now among you or members about your own security, given some of the chatter that's talk about civil war? Some say it's on par with January 6th.
Well, with all due respect, I place your category in the same, your question in that same category, but we did have a briefing that was long planned before any of the actions of this week was long planned for security for members, all members.
So Nancy Pelosi is directly asked, hey, what about all this chat about civil war? I don't really want to talk about that. This news conference is about Taiwan. I'll get to that in a few days. Then another reporter asks, are you worried about your personal safety given civil war? Well, I view that question as the other one, which is I'll get to in a few days. So apparently multiple reporters asking about how the country's flipping out and half the country's talking about civil war. It's not really that important enough for Nancy Pelosi to have to address. She'll get to it in a few days. Maybe it won't get worse in that time. That's literally how she handled that. And she was literally asked about civil war, and that's literally how she handled it. She's not alone. Let's take a look here. I want to go to minute 35.
The department filed a motion to make public the warrant and receipt in light of the former president's public confirmation of the search, surrounding circumstances, and the substantial public interest in this matter. Faithful adherence to the rule of law is the bedrock principle of the Justice Department and of our democracy. Upholding the rule of law means applying the law evenly, without fear or favor. Under my watch, that is precisely what the Justice Department.
Now, I want you to pay attention to that section where he says the Justice Department goal is to prosecute without fear of favor. Remember that, okay? Now I'm going to show you something. Oh, where is it? Okay, Texas violence. There you go.
The C-SPAN networks bring you long-form public affairs programming in the nation's capital and are a public service of your.
or vast quantities of information exposed in such similar situations have been handled in the past. About information. Our judgment comes to the prosecutors. We frequently make recommendations and engage in productive conversations with prosecutors about what resolution may be appropriate given the evidence. In this case, given the importance of the matter, I think unusual transparency is in order. Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. Prosecutors necessarily weigh a number of factors before deciding whether to bring charges. There are obvious considerations like the strength of the evidence, especially regarding intent. Responsible decisions also consider the context of the person's actions and how similar situations have been handled in the past. In looking back at our investigations into the mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information, or vast quantities of information exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct, or indications of disloyalty to the United States, or efforts to obstruct justice. We do not see those things here. To be clear, This is not to suggest that in similar circumstances, a person who engaged in this activity would face no consequences.
Right there. This is not to say that a person who was engaged in similar actions would not face consequences. That is James Comey, the FBI director. And what he's saying is Hillary Clinton was negligent with her mass emails, and national security information was lost or sent out there. And it was literally, they said, reckless, and she shouldn't have done that. And maybe secrets got out. But in our opinion, we don't feel it's worth prosecuting. But just because we didn't feel that it's worth prosecuting, don't interpret that to mean that you could do this and get away with it too. So you take that statement by FBI Director James Comey, and then you add it to selective prosecution of the law by Merrick Garland, and they seem to contradict. So Merrick Garland saying, hey, this is about fair prosecution of the law. Nobody's above the law. Everybody's fairly prosecuted. There's no bias at all. That's how it works. Republicans don't buy that, although that's what Merrick Garland says. Then we look at James Comey, who's the FBI director, and he says, well, Hillary Clinton took documents, and they were secret documents, and secrets were lost and spies, and it was reckless, and she wasn't supposed to do that, and it was against recommendations, but we didn't, quotes, feel that there was a prosecution. In addition, don't think, though, that this is okay and you could get away with it. So basically what that told people was, we're not going to prosecute because we don't feel like it, but don't think you can do this because basically it's a crime. And then they prosecute Trump for something similar. Now, I'm not a lawyer. Maybe there is some distinct differences, but on the surface, it looks exactly like what Andrew Yang warned us about. The optics are bad. You may say this is unbiased or whatever, but when you look at the James Comey interview and you compare that to it, the optics are bad. Point is, not trying to side with the Republicans on this, not trying to side with Trump, but the argument that conservatives have no basis for thinking that this is political is not true. When you look at how Hillary Clinton was not prosecuted for that action, and also it's a fact that she used her money, or the Democratic Party money, to finance the Steele dossier and feed it to the FBI. That too is a crime. Those aren't conspiracy theories. Those both came out. They're not being prosecuted. Now, maybe there's a good reason for that. But when you look at that, it's a huge national example, and then you look at Trump, to Republicans, there's at least enough on the surface to look like selective application of the law, which looks like the exact opposite of what Merrick Garland is saying. I also want to point out, when you saw Nancy Pelosi was asked this question, she didn't really want to answer it. And then she was asked a second time, and she didn't really want to answer it. So Nancy Pelosi's asked twice about, hey, a lot of people are talking about civil war and the dissolution of America. Are you worried? I'm busy talking about Taiwan. I'll get to that in the next few days. Think about that while I share with you this. Just think about that response. And take a look at this.
Is doing. All Americans are entitled to the even-handed application of the law. I am honored to work alongside them. This is all I can say right now. More information will be made available in the appropriate way and at the appropriate time.
Period. That's exactly what Nancy Pelosi said. So Merrick Garland was asked, what is this case is about? What do you think you're going to find? He answered none of it. So people are freaking out. They're talking about civil war. Merrick Garland comes on TV to calm it down, and it's a boilerplate speech. We filed the proper paperwork. It was filed properly. This was properly done. It was a very procedural speech. We did this step. We did that step. We did this step. Procedure, procedure, procedure. See, we follow the perfect procedure. That's not what people are asking for. They were asking for, what do you think you have on Trump? Is it solid? And what is it? And Merrick Garland, literally, you saw there, refused to answer the question. People are freaking out. They're talking about civil war and national divorce. And the head of the Justice Department refuses to answer the question and add the clarification that Andrew Yang is asking for to calm the situation down. Merrick Garland says, I can't answer the question, and I'll answer it when I can in the future. Nancy Pelosi is also asked about civil war in America, and she goes, I don't really want to deal with this question. I'll get to it to the future. So we have the top leader of the Justice Department and the top leader of the Democratic Party, both saying, yeah, I get a lot of people are talking about civil war, national divorce, and going crazy, but I'll get to it in a few days. I don't really have an answer for you. That doesn't sound like you're taking the situation seriously. It doesn't sound like you're ready to prepare for the fight. So when I see Merrick Garland do that and I see Nancy Pelosi do it, I don't think they're ready to battle the fight that needs to happen right now to calm this down. And when you look at what James Comey did and how no one in the media is addressing that, I'll also point that out. When you look at all the stuff about Donald Trump and how this is not a banana republic and this is a functional democracy, none of them bring up Comey's speech about Hillary Clinton. Not one. So when the mainstream media can't even acknowledge what conservatives are pointing to and at least argue with them on that, saying, well, actually, Hillary didn't deserve to be prosecuted, but not even bring it up, it convinces conservatives that you're trying to hide something, which convinces them that you are using the government to prosecute a political rival. So the fact that the newspapers won't talk about Comey's speech on Hillary and how conservatives view it as similar at all is infuriating them and limiting a good conversation between the two sides. And the fact that you have the Democrats and the Justice Department unable to address this topic in real time means that will only fester and get worse. Okay, now the other thing that conservatives said was this is a banana republic. You're taking out a political rival using the arm of the government. Now, in response, some liberals have said, oh, conservatives, that's stupid. You guys are wrong. We shouldn't be afraid to prosecute Trump. Strong democracies can uphold political leaders and make them accountable for breaking the law. That's what Bloomberg says. It's not a banana republic. This is democracy working because we're bringing someone at the top level to justice, which is what functional democracies do. I already had it outlined. I guess it erased it. In terms of blowback, Bloomberg's editorial, here we go. Bobby Ghosh points out that the U.S. is actually far behind many other developed democracies when it comes to blasting heads of state with the cleansing fire hose of justice. France, Israel, and South Korea, many more have prosecuted former leaders without triggering civil wars or really even putting a scratch in democracy. So this is the other argument. They're not alone. Business Insider said that. Other democracies, here you go. France, democracy, South Korea, Israel have done this. There's Bloomberg saying the same thing, and there's Business Insider saying the same thing. Hey, you guys are wrong. Democracies do this all the time. It's not that big a deal. This is democracy working. How do we know that? Well, when you look at Israel, France, and South Korea, they were able to prosecute their heads, and they didn't have a civil war. So this is fine that we're doing this, and it doesn't necessarily mean civil war. Let me show you how that's complete garbage and how the Republicans are right on this. Now, again, I don't like Trump. I'm not siding with him. But the argument is, don't worry about Republicans talking about national divorce. They're just being silly. Actually, there's ample evidence for them to believe that there is not fair universal judgment. And there's ample evidence to believe that this behavior is resemblant to a banana republic, failed Latin American democracy, and not just a normal exercise of a democracy functioning. Liberals have pointed to France, Israel, South Korea, and said, see, they did it. So when we do it here, it doesn't have to mean civil war. Let me show you how these examples by liberals are completely wrong and how they completely fail to mention some key points. So let's get right into it. Now, first I want to go to Park Geun-hye. Park Geun-hye. So this is the South Korean president. There she is. Park Geun-hye. This is the South Korean president who was prosecuted, and there wasn't a civil war in South Korea. Let's go here. Let me find it. Okay, so Park's popularity fell to 4 to 5% in South Korea. Donald Trump's popularity went only down about 30%, which still meant he had about a third of the country. Park in South Korea only had 4 to 5%. So basically 95% of the country was unified against Park, whereas here in America, it's only about 65%. If you really want to push it, some people say only 50. So the percentages, South Korea was unified against this woman. She had 5% support, where Donald Trump has at least a third to 40%. Additionally, the National Assembly instead filed a motion for impeachment, which was put to a December 9th, 2016 vote and passed with 234 supporters. Now, the National Assembly of South Korea, the Korean National Assembly, has about 300 seats. Okay, so 300 seats in the Assembly, 234 supporters backed it. So you had about a solid 2/3 dominant majority backed impeaching Park. Whereas here in America, we could not get the Senate to sign on, and you did not have 2/3. You had it passed in the House, and you couldn't get it passed in the Senate. In Korea, it was a solid 2/3 across the board. So in America, you couldn't even get the Senate to impeach him. But in Korea, they got everybody. They got 2/3 of everybody to impeach him. Secondly, the Supreme Court, the Constitutional Court of South Korea, was unanimous in an 8-0 decision in favor of impeachment. The Supreme Court here in America is split between liberals and conservatives. So, Supreme Court in America split, not unified, and would not reach a unified decision on impeachment of Trump. You do not have 2/3 of the federal government against Donald Trump. You don't. You couldn't even pass impeachment with the Senate. They had 2/3 solidly across the government in South Korea. And Park's Prime Minister Hyai's popularity was 5%, whereas Donald Trump's is 30%. So, of course, you didn't have a civil war in South Korea. 95% of the population was against it. The entire Supreme Court was against it. 2/3 of all the government were against it. We have a divided government that can't pass any laws and has stopped a fair investigation to January 6th and stopped 3 different impeachments of Trump. We have a split Supreme Court, and we have at least 30 to 40% of the population still backing Trump. So the factors are demonstrably different in South Korea versus here in America. So it's really not fair to look at South Korea and say, well, 95% disapproval. They didn't have a civil war. That's just like us, where we have a split Supreme Court and almost a 50-50 population split on the issues. Not even comparable. Let's take a look at France. Now, this is the other thing. They go, well, France imprisoned their president. Nicolas Sarkozy was imprisoned. And see, it didn't cause a civil war. But actually, that's not true. So Sarkozy, it did not go to jail. So in America, we're talking about Trump's going to go to prison and he's going to serve years in jail. In France, they didn't even do that. They said Sarkozy committed crimes, but Sarkozy is still popular with the conservatives. So while he committed the crime, we're going to give him house arrest. We are not going to send him to prison because that would probably cause a disruption in France. So when they say, well, us prosecuting Donald Trump for going to prison doesn't have to mean civil war. Look at France. Well, actually, that's also not a fair example, too, because France said, we're not even going to put this guy in prison because we think that could cause division and we won't want to do that. So the French aren't even going as far as we are in America. In America, we're talking about life in prison, years in prison. In France, they said, we're not going to do that because it will cause division. So they didn't even try to do what we're doing. Again, another second failed example for comparison. Let's go to the third one. Now, the third one happens to do with Benjamin Netanyahu. Netanyahu was the prime minister of Israel, and he was recently prosecuted for corruption in Israel, and they're right. It did not result in civil war. But here's the thing. Wide-ranging Israeli coalition reaches deal to form. Israel forms new coalition ending Netanyahu rule. Israel's parliament approves new government ousting. And, the thing is that what happened was basically all of the rest of the government outside Netanyahu formed a coalition government to replace him. We don't have anything like that in America. So Netanyahu was replaced by a coalition of basically all of the rest of the people in the government coming together to get rid of him. This would be the equivalent of all the Republicans and all the Democrats coming together to get rid of Trump. That didn't happen. So South Korea, almost completely unified against Prime Minister Hai when they got rid of him. Nothing like here in America. France did not pursue jail time because they were worried about division, unlike here in America. Israel was only able to replace him because they had a coalition of everybody coming together. We don't have a coalition of everybody coming together. We have two parties that are diametrically opposed. So we are not like France. We are not like South Korea. We are not like Israel. And so the examples by liberals that we don't need to worry about civil war because here's these other democracies and they did this and it didn't equal civil war don't apply to us at all. Again, don't like Trump, not backing the Republicans, not agreeing with them. But when we're saying that these people are crazy for talking about national divorce and they have nothing going on, when you watch that James Comey speech, and when you look at the actual examples of Israel, France, and South Korea and see how they don't apply to us, it's not strong enough. And I applaud Andrew Yang for saying, look, I don't like Trump either, but bad optics. And Andrew Yang is saying, if you guys don't have something airtight on Trump, you're going to cause things to be worse. Now, I have to agree. If it doesn't come out that they've got something super airtight on Trump and it's something like, if it appears as though they took Al Capone to court for tax evasion instead of any of the real crimes he did, it's going to be civil war. So I don't know. Maybe the DOJ, FBI has something solid on them. Maybe they do. But you just saw the interview with Merrick Garland where he couldn't answer the question. People are freaking out and they think it's unfair. And Nancy Pelosi wouldn't talk about it and Merrick Garland wouldn't talk about it. And they said they'd get to it in a few days. That's only going to fester the problem. So we're going to find out if this is something hard and substantial against Trump or if it's something like you didn't return your library book. And if it's not something solid, I'm going to go off what Andrew Yang's opinion is. This is going to get so much worse. And I have to say, when you look at Merrick Garland and Nancy Pelosi's deer in the headlight, unprepared to deal with the drama of the situation speeches, and the fact that they did that back to back, it really is a bad sign that America's going to be able to handle this correctly. So expect national divorce to get worse. And expect things to get even more dicey, which is good for the climate of Calexit, but not necessarily good for Americans. But we didn't make it. All right, we'll take a look at the comments, see how they go. Every broken clock is right twice per day. So yes, they're right. The USA is a banana republic. I've been saying America is a failed Latin democracy for years, and nobody wanted to back me up. A failed Latin American democracy is another way of saying banana republic. I was saying that since 2014. So I don't like Trump, but it ain't working. And clearly this has a tinge of politicism, given that Hillary Clinton was caught committing two different crimes and got off completely clean. So, maybe if they prosecuted her, there'd be something, but they didn't. And that's only going to fuel Republicans in this debate. So expect national divorce to get even worse. We'll see you soon because things are going to keep developing quickly.